crowns have rested upon the smallest heads, and sceptres have been held by the tiniest hands. Tonight we journey through time to meet the remarkable children who inherited thrones, commanded armies, and shaped civilizations before they could even tie their own shoes. As you settle into comfort tonight, let these tales of courage, wisdom, and resilience wash over you like a gentle tide. May you dream of golden crowns and ancient palaces, of young hearts brave enough to carry the weight of kingdoms, and of the timeless truth that greatness can emerge at any age. Sleep well, and let history's youngest rulers watch over your dreams. Shapur II, the Great of Persia. Demographics. Born in 309 AD as heir to the Sassanid Empire, died in 379 AD at age 70. The 10th King of Kings of the Sassanid Empire, Shapur II holds the extraordinary distinction of being the only monarch in recorded history to be crowned before his birth. When King Hormizd II died unexpectedly in 309 AD, leaving his wife pregnant, the Persian nobles faced a succession crisis. Legend tells us that these nobles placed the royal crown directly upon Queen Hormizd's pregnant belly, declaring the unborn child king. This unprecedented act meant that Shapur literally became king while still in his mother's womb, making him the youngest ruler ever to assume power. The dramatic coronation ceremony involved the entire court acknowledging the unborn child as their sovereign, with the crown resting symbolically on the royal womb. Upon his actual birth, baby Shapur was already king, having technically ruled for several months before drawing his first breath. Despite this unusual beginning, Shapur II would prove to be one of Persia's greatest monarchs, ruling for a remarkable 70 years. His reign became known for military victories against the Roman Empire, extensive territorial expansion, and significant religious and cultural developments. The young king who began life already wearing a crown would grow to earn the title the Great, justifying the extraordinary faith his nobles had placed in him before his birth. Henry VI of England, 1421 to 1471. Demographics. Born September 6, 1421, at Windsor Castle. Became King of England at 8 months old, later King of France, House of Lancaster. Henry VI became England's youngest monarch when his father, the legendary warrior King Henry V, died of dysentery while campaigning in France. At just 8 months old, the infant Henry inherited not only the throne of England, but also his father's claim to the French crown, making him the most powerful child ruler in medieval Europe. His coronation at Westminster Abbey had to be specially adapted for an infant who could barely sit upright, with courtiers holding the tiny king throughout the ceremony. Because Henry was far too young to rule, a regency council led by his uncles governed England and continued the 100 Years' War in France. The child king's minority lasted nearly 16 years, during which time England's fortunes in France began to decline despite his dual monarchy. Unlike his warrior father, Henry VI grew into a pious, scholarly and gentle ruler who preferred books to battles and prayer to politics. His peaceful nature, while admirable, proved disastrous for a medieval king expected to lead armies and project strength. Henry's weakness eventually led to the Wars of the Roses, as rival claimants challenged his authority. His reign ended in tragedy when he was murdered in the Tower of London, but he is remembered for founding Eton College and King's College, Cambridge, establishing educational legacies that continue today. Mary, Queen of Scots, 1542 to 1587. Demographics. Born December 8, 1542, at Linlithgow Palace, Scotland. Became Queen of Scotland at 6 days old, later Queen of France, House of Stuart. Mary Stuart became one of history's most famous child rulers when she inherited the Scottish throne at just 6 days old, following the sudden death of her father, King James V. The traumatic circumstances of her accession began when James V, devastated by military defeat at the Battle of Solway Moss, fell ill and died, reportedly predicting that the Stuart dynasty would end with his infant daughter. Mary's mother, Marie de Guise, served as regent while the baby queen was raised in the heavily fortified Stirling Castle, protected from English attempts to force a marriage with the young Edward VI. At age 5, Mary was sent to France for her safety and education, where she lived in the sophisticated French court and eventually married the Dauphin Francis. When Francis became King of France, Mary briefly ruled as Queen of both Scotland and France, making her one of the most powerful women in Europe despite her youth. Her French upbringing gave her elegant manners and Catholic faith, but left her poorly prepared for Scotland's rough political landscape when she returned as a widow at age 18. Mary's tragic story of 3 marriages, political intrigue and eventual execution by her cousin Elizabeth I has captivated historians for centuries. Her infant succession set in motion a chain of events that would eventually unite the English and Scottish crowns through her son, James VI of Scotland and I of England. Tutankhamun of Egypt circa 1341 to 1323 BC. Demographics: born circa 1341 BC, likely son of Akhenaten, became pharaoh around age 8 to 9, died at approximately 18, 18th dynasty. The boy pharaoh Tutankhamun ascended to the throne of Egypt during one of the most turbulent periods in ancient Egyptian history, following the religious revolution initiated by his likely father, Akhenaten. Originally named Tutankhaten in honor of the sun god Aten, the young king inherited a kingdom in chaos, with traditional religious practices disrupted and Egypt's international standing weakened. At approximately 8 years old, Tutankhamun was far too young to rule independently, so powerful advisors including the general Horemheb and the official Aa controlled the government. These regents immediately began reversing Akhenaten's radical religious reforms, moving the capital back to Memphis and restoring the worship of traditional gods like Amun. The young pharaoh's name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, symbolically rejecting his predecessor's religious revolution. Despite his youth, Tutankhamun's reign saw significant restoration projects, including the refurbishment of temples and the re-establishment of Egypt's diplomatic relationships. Archaeological evidence suggests he may have led military campaigns against Nubia and possibly the Levant, though scholars debate whether he personally participated or merely lent his name to these expeditions. The boy king's short reign ended mysteriously around age 18, possibly due to illness, accident, or assassination. Ironically, Tutankhamun's fame today far exceeds his historical importance, thanks to Howard Carter's discovery of his largely intact tomb in 1922, which revealed the incredible wealth and artistry of ancient Egypt. Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, 1638 to 1715. Demographics: born September 5, 1638, at Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Became King of France at age 4, ruled for 72 years, House of Bourbon. Louis XIV ascended the French throne at age 4 following his father, Louis XIII's death, beginning what would become the longest verified reign in European history at 72 years and 110 days. The young king's minority was dominated by his mother Anne of Austria, who served as regent, and her chief minister Cardinal Mazarin, who effectively ruled France during Louise's childhood. The early years of Louis's reign were marked by the civil wars of the Fronde, rebellions by French nobles who sought to limit royal power while the king was still a child. These traumatic experiences of seeing his authority challenged and being forced to flee Paris left a lasting impression on the young Louis, who would later concentrate unprecedented power in his own hands. As he matured, Louis gradually took control from his advisors, famously declaring after Mazarin's death that he would be his own chief minister. The Sun King, as he became known, transformed France into the dominant European power through military conquest, cultural achievement, and diplomatic influence. His court at Versailles became the centre of European culture, with other monarchs copying French fashions, language, and customs. Louis's reign saw France reach heights of artistic and architectural achievement, with figures like Molière, Racine, and Jules Hardouin-Mansart creating enduring masterpieces. However, his constant warfare and extravagant spending left France heavily in debt, setting the stage for the financial crisis that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. Puyi, last Emperor of China, 1906 to 1967. Demographics. Born February 7, 1906 in Beijing, became emperor at age 2, abdicated 1912, briefly restored 1917. Qing Dynasty. Puyi ascended the dragon throne as China's last emperor when he was barely 2 years old, following the death of his uncle Emperor Guangxu and the machinations of the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi. The toddler emperor's coronation in the Forbidden City was a spectacular traditional ceremony, though the tiny boy reportedly cried throughout the proceedings and had to be comforted by his handlers. His regent was his father, Prince Chun, who faced the impossible task of ruling a crumbling empire racked by foreign intervention, internal rebellion, and republican revolution. Within 4 years of Puyi's accession, the Qing dynasty collapsed under the pressure of Sun Yat-sen's republican movement, forcing the child emperor to abdicate in 1912. However, Puyi was allowed to continue living in the Forbidden City with imperial honours, creating the bizarre situation of a deposed emperor maintaining court rituals while China became a republic. The young ex-emperor received a Western education from English tutor Reginald Johnston, who introduced him to modern ideas while he remained isolated in his ancient palace. In 1917, at age 11, Puyi was briefly restored to the throne for 12 days by warlord Zhang Xun, making him emperor twice before reaching adulthood. Later in life, Puyi would become a puppet ruler of Japanese-controlled Manchukuo before eventually being captured, imprisoned, and reformed by the communist government. His extraordinary life journey from god-emperor to war criminal to reformed citizen reflects China's traumatic transition from empire to modern nation. Christina of Sweden, 1626 to 1689. Demographics. Born December 18, 1626 in Stockholm. Became queen at age 6, abdicated at 27. House of Vasa. Christina became Queen of Sweden at 6 years old when her father, the warrior king Gustavus Adolphus, was killed at the Battle of Lützen during the 30 Years' War. Her minority was governed by a regency led by Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, who continued her father's successful military campaigns and maintained Sweden's position as a major European power. The young queen received an exceptional education for any child, let alone a girl, studying Latin, Greek, French, and German while learning philosophy, theology, and statecraft from Europe's finest tutors. Christina's intellectual brilliance became apparent early, and she corresponded with leading scholars including René Descartes, whom she invited to her court. As she matured, Christina showed little interest in traditional female roles, preferring scholarly pursuits to marriage and motherhood, and shocking her court by wearing men's clothing and refusing to marry. Her reign saw continued Swedish military success and significant cultural achievement, as she patronised arts and sciences while building one of Europe's finest libraries. However, Christina's conversion to Catholicism and her refusal to marry and produce an heir created a constitutional crisis. In 1654, at age 27, she made the unprecedented decision to abdicate in favour of her cousin Charles Gustav, becoming one of the few monarchs in history to voluntarily surrender power. After abdication, she moved to Rome, where she lived as a Catholic convert and patron of the arts, continuing to shock European society with her unconventional behaviour and intellectual pursuits. Ivan IV, the Terrible of Russia, 1530 to 1584. Demographics. Born August 25, 1530, in Kolomenskoye near Moscow. Became Grand Prince at age 3, first Tsar at 16. House of Rurik. Ivan IV became Grand Prince of Moscow at the tender age of 3, when his father Vasily III died unexpectedly, leaving the vast Russian principality in the hands of his widow Elena Glinskaya, who served as regent. The young prince's childhood was marked by political instability, as various boyar families fought for control over the regency and the realm. When Elena died in 1538, possibly by poisoning, 7-year-old Ivan was left effectively orphaned and at the mercy of competing noble factions who showed him little respect or care. This traumatic childhood, filled with violence, neglect, and political intrigue, profoundly shaped Ivan's character and his later reputation for cruelty. Despite these difficult circumstances, Ivan received a good education and proved to be highly intelligent, well-read, and articulate. At age 16, Ivan took control of the government and immediately made a dramatic statement by having himself crowned, not just as Grand Prince, but as Tsar, the first Russian ruler to use this imperial title officially. His early reign showed great promise, as he implemented legal reforms, expanded Russian territory, and promoted trade and cultural development. However, the trauma of his childhood, combined with the absolute power of his position, gradually transformed Ivan into the paranoid and violent ruler who earned the epithet Terrible. His reign would be remembered for both significant achievements in state-building and territorial expansion, and for the horrific Oprichnina period when he unleashed unprecedented terror against his own nobility. Edward VI of England, 1537 to 1553. Demographics. Born October 12, 1537, at Hampton Court Palace. Became king at age 9, died at 15, House of Tudor. Edward VI became king at 9 years old when his father Henry VIII died, inheriting a kingdom in religious turmoil and a government controlled by ambitious nobles. As Henry VIII's only legitimate male heir, Edward's succession was secured, but his youth necessitated a regency council, led by his uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset. The boy king was highly intelligent and had received an excellent humanist education, studying Latin, Greek, French, theology, and philosophy under leading Protestant tutors. Unlike his father, who had broken with Rome for political reasons, Edward was a fervent Protestant from childhood, enthusiastically supporting the English Reformation and the establishment of a truly Protestant Church of England. During his short reign, England saw radical religious changes, including the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer and the destruction of Catholic imagery in churches. Edward actively participated in government despite his youth, showing remarkable maturity in council meetings and taking particular interest in religious reform. However, his reign was marked by social and economic problems, including widespread rebellion and inflation, which his regents struggled to control. The young king's health began to fail in early 1553, possibly due to tuberculosis or lung infection, leading to a succession crisis as Protestant nobles tried to prevent his Catholic half-sister Mary from taking the throne. Edward's attempt to alter the succession in favour of Lady Jane Grey failed, and he died at age 15, having ruled for just 6 years but leaving a lasting impact on English religious development. Peter I, the Great of Russia, 1672 to 1725. Demographics, born June 9, 1672 in Moscow, became co-Tsar at age 10 with his half-brother Ivan V, House of Romanov. Peter III became co-Tsar at age 10 in an unprecedented arrangement following the death of his half-brother Fyodor III, when rival court factions agreed to crown both Peter and his older half-brother Ivan V as co-rulers. This unusual dual monarchy was necessary because Ivan, though older, was physically and mentally weak, while Peter, though younger, was vigorous and intelligent but still a child. Their older sister Sophia Alexeyevna served as regent, effectively ruling Russia while the two boy Tsars performed ceremonial functions from specially constructed double thrones. The arrangement allowed Peter to grow up with royal authority while gradually learning statecraft, though he spent much of his youth in the countryside away from court intrigue. Peter's education was unconventional for a Russian royal, as he learned practical skills like carpentry and navigation alongside traditional subjects, developing the hands-on approach that would characterize his later reforms. When Ivan died in 1696, Peter became sole ruler at age 24, but his experience as a child co-ruler had prepared him for the enormous task of modernizing Russia. His reign would transform Russia from a medieval kingdom into a major European power, earning him the title the Great. Peter's childhood experience of sharing power and dealing with court politics taught him valuable lessons about leadership and statecraft that he would use throughout his revolutionary reign. The boy who'd once sat on a double throne would grow up to single-handedly drag Russia into the modern era. Alfonso XIII of Spain, 1886 to 1941. Demographics. Born May 17, 1886, at the Royal Palace of Madrid. Became king at birth, his father having died before his birth. House of Bourbon. Alfonso XIII became king at the moment of his birth on May 17, 1886, because his father Alfonso XII had died the previous November, while his mother Queen Maria Cristina was still pregnant. This made Alfonso one of the few posthumous monarchs in history, inheriting a crown before he could even open his eyes. The dramatic circumstances of his accession meant that Spain had been without a king for months, with Queen Maria Cristina serving as regent while awaiting the birth of her child. When Alfonso was finally born, he was immediately proclaimed king, making him the youngest monarch ever to assume the Spanish throne. His mother continued as regent throughout his minority, governing Spain during a period of colonial crisis and political instability. The young king's birth had been anxiously awaited throughout Spain, as the country desperately needed a male heir to ensure political stability. Alfonso's minority coincided with Spain's loss of its remaining American colonies, including Cuba and Puerto Rico following the Spanish-American War of 1898. Despite these challenges, his mother's regency was generally successful in maintaining constitutional government and national unity. Alfonso formally assumed personal rule in 1902 at age 16, but his reign would be marked by political instability, military difficulties in Morocco, and ultimately the crisis that led to his abdication and the establishment of the Second Spanish Republic. The king who'd been born into power would ultimately lose it, going into exile in 1931 and dying in Rome 10 years later without ever returning to Spain. John I, the Posthumous of France, 1316. Demographics. Born November 15th, 1316, died November 19th, 1316. Son of Louis the West of France, House of Capet. John I of France holds the tragic distinction of having the shortest reign in French history, ruling for only 4 or 5 days before his death in infancy. Born posthumously after his father Louis X died, John automatically became king at birth, making him the youngest person ever to be King of France and the only French monarch to hold the title for his entire life. His brief existence created a constitutional crisis, as his father had left no clear succession plan, and various claimants emerged to challenge an infant's right to rule. During his 4 days of life, John reigned under the regency of his uncle Philip V, though the baby king was obviously incapable of any royal functions. The circumstances of John's birth were particularly dramatic, as his father had died suddenly, leaving his pregnant wife Isabella to face the uncertainties of medieval childbirth while the kingdom waited anxiously for a potential heir. When John was finally born, there was initially great joy that France had a male heir, but this quickly turned to sorrow when the infant died just days later. His death immediately sparked the succession crisis that his birth had temporarily resolved, with his uncle Philip V claiming the throne over the rival claims of John's half-sister Joan. The baby king's brief life and shorter reign became a footnote in French history, but his existence marked the end of the direct Capetian line that had ruled France for over 3 centuries. John's tomb became a monument to royal tragedy, commemorating a king who never had the chance to live, let alone rule. Sobhuza II of Swaziland, 1899 to 1982. Demographics. Born July 22, 1899 in Zombodze, Swaziland. Became paramount chief at 4 months old. Traditional Swazi monarchy. Sobhuza II became the world's longest reigning monarch after being proclaimed King of Swaziland at just 4 months old, following his father's death in December 1899. His incredibly long reign of 82 years and 254 days began during the height of British colonial rule, when Swaziland was a protectorate and traditional rulers had limited actual power. The infant king's early years were marked by British efforts to modernise Swaziland and reduce traditional authority, but his grandmother, Queen Regent Labotsibeni, fought to preserve Swazi customs and prepare young Sobhuza for eventual leadership. As a child ruler growing up under colonial administration, Sobhuza received both traditional Swazi education and Western schooling, learning to navigate between 2 very different worlds. His minority lasted until 1921, when he was formally installed as king at age 22, but even then his power was limited by British colonial authorities. Sobhuza's extraordinary longevity allowed him to witness and guide Swaziland's transformation from traditional kingdom to British protectorate to independent nation in 1968. Throughout his reign, he skillfully balanced modernization with tradition, maintaining Swazi cultural identity while adapting to changing political circumstances. His reign saw Swaziland develop economically while preserving its monarchy and traditional social structures. Sobhuza's personal life was equally remarkable, as he married 70 wives and fathered over 200 children, ensuring dynastic succession while following traditional polygamous practices. The infant who became king in 1899 lived to see the 20th century's end approach, making him a bridge between the Victorian era and the modern world. Rukidi IV of Toro, Uganda, born 1992. Demographics, born April 16, 1992, in Fort Portal, Uganda. Became king at age 3 in 1995, currently the world's youngest reigning monarch. Rukidi IV, known as King Oyo, became the world's youngest reigning monarch when he was crowned ruler of the Toro Kingdom in Uganda at just 3 years old in 1995. His succession came after his father, King Patrick David Matthew Kaboyo Olumi III, was killed in a car accident, leaving the toddler prince as the heir to one of Uganda's traditional kingdoms. The coronation ceremony attracted international attention as the tiny king, barely able to walk steadily, was placed on the throne wearing traditional regalia that was almost larger than he was. During his minority, his mother Queen Best Kemigisa served as regent, guiding the kingdom while her son received both traditional education in Toro customs and modern Western schooling. The young king's childhood was spent learning the responsibilities of traditional leadership, while also attending regular school like any other child, creating a unique dual existence between royal duties and normal childhood experiences. As he grew older, King Oyo became increasingly involved in kingdom affairs, participating in traditional ceremonies and learning about the history and customs of his people. His reign has coincided with efforts to revitalize traditional monarchy in Uganda, where kingdoms were restored in 1993 after being abolished by previous governments. Today, as an adult, King Oyo continues to rule the Toro Kingdom while pursuing higher education and balancing traditional leadership with modern life. His story represents the modern African monarchy's evolution, showing how traditional institutions can adapt and survive in contemporary society. The 3-year-old who once struggled to hold his scepter has grown into a thoughtful leader, working to preserve his people's cultural heritage while embracing progress. Theodosius II of Byzantine Empire, 401 to 450. Demographics, born April 10th, 401 in Constantinople. Became co-emperor at 9 months, sole emperor at age 7, House of Theodosius. Theodosius II was elevated to co-emperor at just 9 months old by his father Arcadius, who wanted to ensure a smooth succession in the unstable Byzantine Empire. When Arcadius died in 408, 7-year-old Theodosius became sole emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, beginning one of the longest reigns in Byzantine history at 42 years. His minority was governed by a regency dominated by his sister Pulcheria, who was only 2 years older but remarkably capable and strong-willed. The child emperor received an excellent education in Greek literature, theology, and law, developing into a scholarly and pious ruler more interested in religious matters than military campaigns. His reign was marked by relative peace and internal stability, allowing the Eastern Empire to flourish culturally and economically, while the Western Empire struggled with barbarian invasions. Theodosius is best remembered for commissioning the Theodosian Code, a comprehensive collection of Roman laws that influenced legal systems for centuries. His deep religious faith led to significant church-building projects, including the expansion of Constantinople's churches and the founding of the University of Constantinople. The emperor's scholarly nature and preference for diplomacy over warfare helped preserve Byzantine power through peaceful negotiations rather than costly military campaigns. Despite his peaceful disposition, Theodosius did face military challenges, particularly from Attila the Hun, whom he managed through tribute payments and diplomatic skill. His long reign provided stability during a crucial period when the Western Roman Empire was collapsing, allowing Byzantine civilization to develop its distinctive character. The infant who became emperor grew into a thoughtful ruler whose policies shaped the Byzantine Empire for generations. Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, 1161 to 1185. Demographics. Born 1161 in Jerusalem, became king at age 13, died at 23, House of Anjou. Baldwin IV became king of Jerusalem at 13, inheriting the most precarious throne in medieval Christendom during the height of the Crusader period. His coronation came after his father Amalric IV died suddenly, leaving the teenage prince to face the growing power of Saladin and the constant threat of Muslim reconquest. The young king's reign was complicated by his diagnosis with leprosy, discovered during his childhood, which progressively weakened his body while his mind remained sharp and capable. Despite his devastating illness, Baldwin proved to be a skilled military leader and shrewd politician, successfully defending the Crusader kingdom against overwhelming odds. His greatest triumph came at the Battle of Montgisard in 1177, when the teenage leper king personally led his forces to a stunning victory over Saladin's much larger army. Baldwin's physical deterioration forced him to rely increasingly on advisors and regents, creating political instability as various factions competed for influence over the dying king. His desperate search for a suitable successor led to complex negotiations for his sister Sibylla's marriage, ultimately resulting in the controversial crowning of Guy de Lusignan. The young king's courage in battle despite his disfiguring disease made him a legendary figure, inspiring both contemporaries and later historians with his determination to defend Christian Jerusalem. Baldwin's reign represented the last great period of Crusader success, as the kingdom would fall to Saladin shortly after his death. The boy who became king while battling a fatal disease showed that true nobility comes from character rather than physical perfection, leaving a legacy of courage that outlasted his brief reign. Juana la Loca, the Mad of Castile, 1479 to 1555. Demographics. Born November 6, 1479 in Toledo, became Queen of Castile at age 25, though declared mentally incapable, House of Trastamara. While Juana herself was not a child ruler, her story involves her son Charles V, who became her heir when she was declared mentally incompetent, creating a unique situation where a child inherited through a living but incapacitated parent. Born as the third child of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, Juana was never expected to rule, but the deaths of her older siblings made her the heir to the Spanish throne. Her marriage to Philip the Handsome of Austria was arranged for political reasons, but Juana fell deeply in love with her husband, leading to an obsessive relationship that would define her life. When Philip died suddenly in 1506, Juana's grief was so intense that she refused to allow his burial, carrying his coffin with her as she travelled, earning her the nickname La Loca, the Mad. Her erratic behaviour and apparent mental instability led to her being declared unfit to rule, despite being the legitimate Queen of Castile. This created a constitutional crisis that was resolved by having her young son Charles, born in 1500, declared king while she remained nominally queen but under confinement. Charles thus became one of history's most powerful rulers while still a teenager, governing through regents until he came of age, in part because his mother was alive but unable to rule. Juana's tragic story shows how mental illness could be used politically in royal succession, as various parties manipulated her condition to advance their own interests. she spent most of her adult life confined in the castle of Tordesillas, officially queen but powerless, while her son built one of history's greatest empires. Her situation created the precedent for a child to rule over multiple kingdoms due to a parent's incapacity rather than death. Akbar the Great of Mughal Empire, 1542 to 1605. Demographics. Born October 15, 1542, in Umakot, Sindh. Became emperor at age 13. Mughal dynasty. Akbar ascended the Mughal throne at 13 years old when his father Humayun died after falling downstairs in his library, leaving the teenage prince to inherit a fragmented and unstable empire. The young emperor's accession was precarious, as his father had only recently reclaimed the Mughal territories from the Afghan ruler Sher Shah Suri, and many regions remained unconquered or rebellious. During his minority, Akbar was guided by his regent Bayram Khan, a capable military commander who helped consolidate Mughal power and expand the empire's boundaries. Despite being largely illiterate throughout his life, Akbar proved to be a brilliant military strategist and enlightened ruler who would transform the Mughal Empire into one of the world's greatest powers. His youth allowed him to adapt and learn from diverse cultures within his empire, developing the syncretic approach to governance that would become his hallmark. At age 18, Akbar dismissed his regent and began ruling independently, immediately demonstrating the wisdom and tolerance that would characterize his reign. His policy of religious tolerance was revolutionary for its time, as he encouraged dialogue between different faiths and even created his own syncretic religion called Din-e-Ilahi. The emperor's military genius became apparent as he conquered most of the Indian subcontinent, but he was equally skilled at governance, creating an efficient administrative system that survived for centuries. Akbar's court became a centre of learning and culture, attracting scholars, artists, and philosophers from across the known world. The teenager who inherited a precarious throne grew into one of history's greatest rulers, showing how youth combined with wisdom can achieve extraordinary things. Amenhotep II of Egypt circa 1427 to 1401 BC. Demographics. Born circa 1427 BC, became pharaoh around age 18, 18th dynasty of Egypt. Amenhotep II ascended to the Egyptian throne as a young man around age 18, following the death of his father Thutmose III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. While not quite a child ruler, his youth and the manner of his succession demonstrate the challenges facing young monarchs in the ancient world. The prince had been carefully prepared for kingship, serving as his father's co-regent and learning military tactics, diplomacy, and religious duties necessary for pharaonic rule. His accession came at a crucial time when Egypt's empire was at its height, stretching from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates River in the north, requiring strong leadership to maintain. The young pharaoh immediately faced rebellions in Syria-Palestine, where local rulers tested the new king's resolve and military capability. Amenhotep II proved himself a worthy successor to his father by personally leading military campaigns and demonstrating the physical prowess expected of an Egyptian pharaoh. Ancient records describe him as an exceptional athlete and archer, capable of shooting arrows through copper targets and rowing faster than trained oarsmen. His youth actually became an advantage in military campaigns, as he could endure the physical demands of ancient warfare while inspiring his troops through personal example. The young pharaoh's reign saw continued Egyptian dominance in the Near East, successful military campaigns, and extensive building projects that demonstrated Egypt's wealth and power. His mortuary temple and tomb reflect the artistic achievements of his reign and his successful transition from prince to powerful pharaoh. Amenhotep II's success shows how proper preparation and natural ability could enable a young ruler to maintain one of history's greatest empires. Michael III, the Drunkard of Byzantine Empire, 840 to 867. Demographics. Born January 19, 840 in Constantinople. Became emperor at age 2. Macedonian dynasty founder. Michael III became Byzantine emperor at the tender age of 2 when his father Theophilos died in 842, beginning a reign that would be dominated by regents and ultimately end in assassination. His mother Theodora served as regent during his minority, reversing his father's iconoclastic policies and restoring the veneration of religious images, earning her sainthood in the Orthodox Church. The young emperor's early years were marked by his mother's capable governance and the empire's recovery from the iconoclastic controversy that had divided Byzantine society for generations. As Michael grew older, he began to chafe under his mother's control, eventually overthrowing her regency in 856 with the help of his uncle Bardas. Unfortunately, the emperor who had shown promise as a child developed into a dissolute ruler more interested in chariot racing, drinking and entertainment than governing the empire. His nickname, the Drunkard, reflects his reputation for excessive partying and neglect of imperial duties, though some historians argue this characterization was exaggerated by hostile sources. Despite his personal failings, Michael's reign saw important military victories, including successful campaigns against the Arabs and the conversion of Bulgaria to Orthodox Christianity. The emperor's most significant decision was promoting Basil the Macedonian from peasant to imperial companion, ultimately making him co-emperor. This choice proved fatal when Basil, fearing for his own position, arranged Michael's assassination in 867, ending the Amorian dynasty and founding the Macedonian dynasty. Michael's story illustrates how a promising child ruler can be corrupted by absolute power and poor influences, leading to personal destruction and dynastic change. The 2-year-old who inherited the Byzantine throne died at 27. Victim of his own poor judgment and the palace intrigue he had failed to master. Cleopatra, the 7th of Egypt, 69 to 30 BC. Demographics. Born 69 BC in Alexandria. Became co-ruler at age 18, sole ruler shortly after. Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra VII ascended to the Egyptian throne at 18 when her father Ptolemy XII died, initially sharing power with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, according to Ptolemaic tradition and Egyptian law. Though not quite a child ruler, her youth and the circumstances of her early reign demonstrate the challenges facing young monarchs in the ancient world. The teenage queen was brilliant, educated, and spoke at least 9 languages, making her one of the most intellectually gifted rulers of antiquity. Her co-rulership with her 10-year-old brother quickly deteriorated into civil war, as rival court factions supported different siblings in typical Ptolemaic fashion. Cleopatra's youth initially worked against her, as many Egyptian nobles preferred her younger, more malleable brother who could be easily controlled by regents and advisors. Forced into exile, the young queen demonstrated remarkable resilience and political acumen, eventually securing Roman support through her famous relationship with Julius Caesar. Her intelligence and charisma allowed her to manipulate much older and more experienced Roman leaders, showing how youth could be an advantage when combined with exceptional ability. Cleopatra's reign saw her transform from a teenage exile into one of history's most powerful and influential women, ruling Egypt for nearly 2 decades. Her story shows how a young ruler could use intellect, charm, and strategic alliances to overcome the disadvantages of youth and gender in the ancient world. The teenager who fled Egypt in a fishing boat returned as a queen who would captivate Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, ultimately becoming the last active pharaoh of Egypt. Shunji Emperor of China, 1638 to 1661. Demographics: born March 15th, 1638 in Mukden. Became emperor at age 5 in 1643. Qing dynasty. The Shunji emperor ascended the dragon throne at just 5 years old when his father Hong Taiji died suddenly, making him the 3rd emperor of the Qing dynasty and the first to rule over all of China. His succession was managed by his uncle Dogon, who served as regent and successfully completed the Manchu conquest of China from the defeated Ming dynasty. The young emperor's childhood was spent learning both Manchu traditions and Chinese classical education, as the Qing rulers sought to legitimize their rule over the Han Chinese majority. During his minority, massive military campaigns extended Qing control throughout China, while the child emperor remained largely ceremonial under his regent's powerful influence. As Shunji matured, he began to assert his own authority, eventually taking control from his uncle's faction and ruling independently. The young emperor showed deep interest in Buddhism and intellectual pursuits, preferring scholarly activities to the military traditions of his Manchu ancestors. His reign saw important administrative reforms that blended Manchu and Chinese governmental practices, creating the system that would govern China for the next 2 centuries. Despite his youth, Shunji proved to be a capable ruler who successfully balanced the demands of his Manchu heritage with the need to govern a predominantly Chinese empire. His personal life was marked by tragedy, including the death of his beloved concubine Dong Yi, which reportedly drove him to consider becoming a Buddhist monk. The emperor's early death at age 23 cut short a reign that had shown great promise, but his policies laid the foundation for the Qing dynasty's long success. The 5-year-old boy who inherited a dynasty in the midst of conquest grew into a thoughtful ruler who helped establish one of China's most enduring imperial systems. Kangxi Emperor of China, 1654 to 1722. Demographics: born May 4th, 1654 in Beijing. Became emperor at age 7 in 1661. Qing dynasty. The Kangxi emperor became ruler of China at 7 years old when his father, the Shunji emperor, died unexpectedly, beginning what would become one of the longest and most successful reigns in Chinese history at 61 years. His early years were dominated by a regency of 4 ministers, but the young emperor gradually asserted his authority and took personal control of government while still a teenager. At age 13, Kangxi executed the powerful Regent Oboy in a palace coup, demonstrating remarkable political maturity and establishing his personal rule decades earlier than most child monarchs. His reign saw China reach unprecedented heights of prosperity, territorial expansion, and cultural achievement, making the Qing dynasty the envy of the world. The emperor's youth allowed him to adapt traditional Chinese governance to Manchu leadership, creating a hybrid system that satisfied both ethnic groups within his empire. Kangxi personally led military campaigns against rebels and foreign enemies, showing the physical courage expected of a Manchu ruler while also mastering Chinese scholarly traditions. His court became a center of learning where he patronized literature, art, and science, even welcoming Jesuit missionaries and learning about European mathematics and astronomy. The emperor's longevity allowed him to see his policies mature and succeed, as China's population doubled and the economy flourished during his reign. His administrative reforms created efficient government systems that lasted for centuries, while his military conquests established borders that largely persist in modern China. Kangxi's personal involvement in government was extraordinary, as he read thousands of memorials and made countless decisions throughout his long reign. This 7-year-old boy who inherited a recently established dynasty grew into one of China's greatest emperors, proving that youth, combined with intelligence and dedication, could achieve remarkable success. Joash of Judah, circa 837 to 800 BC. Demographics. Born circa 837 BC in Jerusalem. Became king at age 7, reigned 40 years. House of David. Joash became king of Judah at 7 years old following one of the most dramatic succession stories in biblical history, when his grandmother Athaliah attempted to murder all potential heirs to secure power for herself. The infant prince was secretly rescued by his aunt Jehosheba and hidden in the temple for 6 years while Athaliah ruled as queen. When Joash was 7, the high priest Jehoiada organized a palace coup, revealing the hidden prince and crowning him king in a dramatic ceremony that restored the Davidic dynasty. The young king's early years were guided by his mentor Jehoiada, who implemented religious reforms and restored proper temple worship after Athaliah's promotion of Baal worship. Under the priest's guidance, Joash proved to be a capable and righteous ruler, ordering extensive repairs to Solomon's temple and promoting religious orthodoxy throughout Judah. The child king's reign initially brought stability and prosperity to Judah, as he followed traditional religious practices and maintained good relationships with neighboring kingdoms. However, after Jehoiada's death, Joash fell under the influence of corrupt nobles who led him away from religious reform and back toward idolatry. This dramatic change in the king's character shows how crucial good advisors were for child rulers and how their absence could lead to moral and political decline. Joash's later years were marked by increasing apostasy, foreign invasions and domestic unrest, culminating in his assassination by his own servants. His story demonstrates both the potential and the dangers of child kingship, showing how early promise could be corrupted by bad influences and poor judgment. This 7-year-old boy, who had been miraculously preserved to restore his dynasty, ultimately failed to live up to his early promise, becoming a cautionary tale about the importance of consistent moral guidance for young rulers. Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus of the Byzantine Empire, 905 to 959. Demographics. Born September 2nd, 905 in Constantinople. Became co-emperor at age 3, sole emperor at 40, Macedonian dynasty. Constantine VII became Byzantine co-emperor at 3 years old, when his father Leo VI associated him with the throne, though he would not achieve real power for decades due to political circumstances and rival claimants. His unusual epithet Porphyrogenitus means born in the purple, referring to the purple-lined chamber where legitimate imperial children were born, emphasizing his legitimacy despite later challenges. The young emperor's early years were dominated by regencies and usurpers, particularly Romanos I Lecapenos, who married his daughter to Constantine but kept real power for himself and his sons. Despite being officially emperor, Constantine spent his youth effectively sidelined from government, developing his intellectual interests in art, literature and scholarship instead of practical politics. His forced exclusion from power actually benefited his education, as he became one of the most learned Byzantine emperors, writing extensively on court ceremonies, imperial administration, and foreign relations. When Constantine finally achieved sole rule at age 40 in 945, he brought a scholarly approach to government that emphasized cultural achievement and diplomatic sophistication over military conquest. His reign saw a flowering of Byzantine art and literature, as the emperor personally patronized artists, writers, and scholars, while also contributing his own works. Constantine's books on imperial ceremonies and foreign peoples remain valuable historical sources, showing how his enforced scholarly youth ultimately served the empire well. The emperor's focus on cultural and diplomatic achievements helped establish Byzantine prestige throughout the medieval world, even as military expansion slowed. His story demonstrates how a child ruler who was denied early political power could channel that frustration into intellectual development that ultimately served his empire. The 3-year-old who became emperor grew into one of Byzantium's most cultured rulers, proving that scholarly achievement could be as valuable as military conquest. David II of Scotland, 1324 to 1371. Demographics. Born March 5th, 1324 at Dunfermline Palace. Became king at age 5 in 1329. House of Bruce. David II became King of Scots at 5 years old when his father Robert the Bruce died, inheriting a kingdom that had just won independence from England but remained fragile and threatened. The young king's accession came at a crucial moment in Scottish history, as England still refused to recognise Scottish independence, and various Scottish nobles questioned the Bruce dynasty's legitimacy. His minority was dominated by regents, and the constant threat of English invasion, culminating in the devastating defeat at Halidon Hill in 1333, when David was just 9 years old. Following this military disaster, the child king was sent to France for safety, spending 7 formative years in exile at the court of King Philip VI. This French exile profoundly shaped David's character, giving him continental tastes and perspectives that would later clash with Scottish traditions and expectations. When he returned to Scotland as a teenager in 1341, David found a kingdom exhausted by years of warfare and weakened by the absence of effective royal leadership. The young king's reign was marked by his disastrous invasion of England in 1346, which resulted in his capture at the Battle of Neville's Cross and 11 years of imprisonment. David's long captivity in English hands was both humiliating for Scotland and personally transformative for the king, who developed close relationships with his captors and adopted many English customs. When he finally returned to Scotland in 1357, David was more English than Scottish in many ways, creating tensions with his nobles who had fought to maintain Scottish independence. His later reign was characterised by attempts to modernise Scotland along English lines, and his controversial efforts to make an English prince his heir, showing how his childhood experiences had shaped his political vision. The 5-year-old boy who inherited his father's hard-won kingdom grew into a king whose loyalty to Scotland was questioned by many of his own subjects. Mieszko I, Slumber of Poland, 990 to 1034. Demographics. Born circa 990 in Poland, became duke at young age, crowned king in 1025, Piast dynasty. Mieszko II inherited the Polish throne as a young man during one of the most turbulent periods in early Polish history, facing challenges that would have tested even experienced rulers. Though not quite a child when he became duke, his youth and the circumstances of his early reign illustrate the difficulties facing young medieval rulers. His father Bolesław I had established Poland as a major power and secured royal status, but this success created enemies among neighbouring rulers who sought to destroy Polish independence. The young duke's accession coincided with the investiture controversy between Pope and Emperor, forcing him to navigate complex religious and political alliances while defending his kingdom from multiple enemies. Mieszko's reign saw devastating invasions by the Holy Roman Empire, Kievan Rus and Bohemia, as his enemies coordinated attacks designed to partition Poland among themselves. The young king showed remarkable resilience in the face of these overwhelming challenges, conducting a fighting retreat that preserved Polish independence even as much territory was temporarily lost. His political skills became apparent as he managed to play various enemies against each other while rebuilding Poland's military and diplomatic strength. The crisis of his reign culminated in a major uprising by Polish nobles who blamed him for the kingdom's troubles, forcing Mieszko into temporary exile before he could restore his authority. His successful return to power demonstrated both his personal courage and his understanding of Polish political dynamics, as he learned to work with noble families who had previously opposed him. Mieszko's reign ultimately preserved Polish independence during its greatest crisis, establishing precedents for royal noble cooperation that would characterize Polish politics for centuries. The young duke, who inherited a powerful kingdom and watched it nearly collapse, grew into a king who understood that survival sometimes required compromise and patience rather than confrontation. Garcia Sanchez III of Pamplona, 1012 to 1054. Demographics. Born 1012 in Pamplona. Became king at age 8 in 1020. Jimenez dynasty. Garcia Sanchez III became king of Pamplona at 8 years old when his father Sancho III the Great died, inheriting the most powerful Christian kingdom in Iberia at the height of its expansion. The young king's succession was complicated by his father's decision to divide the kingdom among his sons, giving Garcia the core realm of Pamplona while his brothers received newly conquered territories. This partition meant that the child king, despite inheriting the senior title, actually ruled over a smaller territory than his adult brothers, creating immediate tensions within the family. Garcia's minority was managed by his mother, Queen Munyadona, who served as regent while trying to maintain the unity of his father's conquests against pressure from his brothers and external enemies. The young king's childhood was spent learning the complex politics of medieval Iberia, where Christian kingdoms competed with each other almost as much as they fought against Muslim taifas. As Garcia matured, he proved to be a capable military leader and skilled politician, successfully defending his kingdom against attacks from his brother Ferdinand I of Leon and various Muslim rulers. His reign saw important cultural and religious developments, including the construction of new churches and the promotion of the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage route through his territories. The young king's court became a centre of Christian culture in northern Spain, attracting scholars, artists, and pilgrims from across Europe. Garcia's military skills were tested repeatedly in conflicts with his brothers, particularly Ferdinand, who sought to unite their father's domains under his own rule rather than Garcia's. The king's death at the Battle of Atapuerca in 1054, fighting against his brother Ferdinand, ended a reign that had successfully maintained Pamplona's independence but failed to restore the unity of his father's empire. The 8-year-old boy who inherited a great kingdom fought throughout his life to preserve what his father had built, ultimately dying in battle against his own family. Al-Hakam II of Córdoba, 915 to 976. Demographics. Born January 13, 915 in Córdoba. Became caliph at age 46, but had been prepared for rule from childhood. Umayyad dynasty. While Al-Hakam II was not technically a child ruler, His story illustrates how Umayyad princes were prepared for leadership from early childhood, and his reign represents one of the most successful examples of careful preparation for royal authority. Born as the son of Abd al-Rahman III, the founder of the Cordoba Caliphate, al-Hakam was educated from infancy to rule one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated kingdoms. His childhood education included Arabic and Latin literature, Islamic theology, mathematics, astronomy, and the practical arts of government and military leadership. The young prince spent his youth shadowing his father in court proceedings, military campaigns, and diplomatic negotiations, gaining practical experience in rulership decades before his accession. This careful preparation was typical of successful Islamic dynasties, where potential rulers received comprehensive education designed to prepare them for the complexities of medieval statecraft. Al-Hakam's youth was spent in one of Europe's most culturally advanced courts, where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars worked together in an atmosphere of intellectual tolerance and curiosity. His early exposure to diverse perspectives and scholarly traditions shaped his later patronage of learning and his relatively tolerant approach to religious minorities. When he finally became caliph at 46, al-Hakam brought to the throne a lifetime of preparation that enabled him to rule effectively despite inheriting the kingdom at what medieval people considered an advanced age. His reign saw Cordoba reach its cultural zenith, with the construction of magnificent libraries, the patronage of scholars and artists, and the creation of one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated administrative systems. The prince, who had been carefully educated from childhood, grew into a ruler whose intellectual achievements rivaled those of the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad and the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople. Casimir IV, Jagiellon of Poland, 1427 to 1492. Demographics. Born November 30th, 1427 in Krakow. Became Grand Duke of Lithuania at 13, King of Poland at 20. Jagiellon dynasty. Casimir IV became Grand Duke of Lithuania at 13 when the Lithuanian nobles elected him to replace his older brother Władysław III, who had become King of Poland and is often absent from Lithuanian affairs. This early elevation to high office came about because the Lithuanian nobility wanted a ruler who would focus on their interests, rather than dividing his attention between Poland and Lithuania as his brother did. The teenage duke's accession created a constitutional crisis, as it violated previous agreements between Poland and Lithuania about unified rulership under the Jagiellon dynasty. Casimir's youth initially made him vulnerable to manipulation by Lithuanian nobles, who sought to use him to advance their own interests against Polish influence in the Union. However, the young duke proved remarkably astute politically, learning to balance competing factions while gradually asserting his own authority over Lithuania's fractious nobility. His leadership skills were tested early when he had to deal with Teutonic Knights' raids, Muscovite expansion, and internal rebellions, challenges that would have overwhelmed many adult rulers. When his brother Władysław III died at the Battle of Varna in 1444, Casimir became the obvious candidate for the Polish throne, though he had to wait until 1447 to be formally elected king. His experience as teenage Grand Duke of Lithuania proved invaluable preparation for ruling the larger and more complex kingdom of Poland. Casimir's long reign of 45 years saw Poland-Lithuania become one of Europe's largest and most powerful states, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. His successful integration of Polish and Lithuanian interest created a lasting union that would dominate Eastern European politics for centuries. The 13-year-old who became Grand Duke of Lithuania grew into one of medieval Europe's most successful monarchs, proving that early responsibility could produce exceptional leadership skills. Jadwiga of Poland, 1373 to 1399. Demographics. Born 1373 in Buda, Hungary. Became King of Poland at age 10 in 1384. Angevin dynasty. Jadwiga became King of Poland at 10 years old in an unprecedented arrangement, as the Polish nobility elected her to rule in her own right rather than simply as a queen consort, making her one of the few female monarchs to hold the title of king. Her accession came after the death of her father Louis I of Hungary, who had ruled Poland through personal union but left only daughters, creating a succession crisis that the Polish nobles resolved by choosing Jadwiga over her older sister. The young queen's coronation required special legislation, as Polish law had never provided for a female ruler, leading to the unique decision to crown her as King, Rex, rather than Queen, Regina, to emphasize her sovereign authority. Her minority was carefully managed by the Polish nobility, who saw in the child ruler an opportunity to strengthen their own power while maintaining royal legitimacy through the Angevin bloodline. The most crucial decision of Jadwiga's early reign was her marriage to Jogaila, Władysław II Jagiełło of Lithuania, a political alliance that created the Polish-Lithuanian Union and began the Christianization of Lithuania. This marriage, arranged when Jadwiga was only 12, required her to break her previous engagement to William of Austria, a decision that reportedly caused her great personal anguish. Despite her youth, Jadwiga proved to be a capable ruler who took active interest in government, legal reform, and cultural development, founding the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Her reign saw significant territorial expansion and the successful integration of Lithuanian territories into the Polish sphere, creating one of medieval Europe's largest kingdoms. The young queen's personal piety and charitable works earned her widespread popular devotion, leading to her eventual canonization by the Catholic Church. Jadwiga's tragic early death at age 25 cut short a reign that had shown remarkable promise, but her political legacy in creating the Polish-Lithuanian Union lasted for centuries. The 10-year-old girl who became king grew into a ruler whose decisions shaped the destiny of Eastern Europe, proving that youth and gender need not prevent effective leadership. Rameses XI of Egypt circa 1107 to 1077 BC. Demographics. Born circa 1107 BC. Became pharaoh as a young man, last ruler of New Kingdom. 20th dynasty. Rameses XI became pharaoh during the final decline of Egypt's New Kingdom, inheriting a throne that had lost much of its ancient power and prestige due to economic crisis, foreign invasion, and internal rebellion. Though the exact age of his accession is uncertain, he was likely a young man when he became the 10th and final pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. His reign coincided with the complete collapse of Egyptian power in Nubia and the Levant, as the empire that had once stretched from Sudan to Syria contracted to little more than the Nile Valley itself. The young pharaoh's authority was challenged by powerful high priests in Thebes who controlled much of southern Egypt, effectively dividing the kingdom and reducing royal power to northern regions around Memphis and the Delta. His reign saw the emergence of Herihor, high priest of Amun at Thebes, who began taking royal prerogatives and even enclosed his name in cartouches like a pharaoh, creating a de facto partition of Egypt. Rameses XI's inability to control these powerful priests reflected the broader weakness of pharaonic authority, as economic decline and foreign pressure had eroded the foundations of royal power. The young pharaoh's reign was marked by attempts to restore Egyptian authority in Nubia, But these campaigns largely failed due to insufficient resources and competing domestic priorities. His court faced constant financial pressures, as temple estates controlled much of Egypt's wealth, while royal revenues declined due to lost territories and reduced trade. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Rameses XI maintained the forms and ceremonies of pharaonic rule, continuing the traditions that had governed Egypt for over 2 millennia. His death marked the end of the New Kingdom period and the beginning of Egypt's third intermediate period, characterized by political fragmentation and foreign domination. The young man who inherited the throne of the pharaohs presided over the end of Egypt's imperial age, showing how even ancient and powerful institutions could collapse under sufficient pressure. Otto III of Holy Roman Empire, 980 to 1002. Demographics: born July 980 in Kessel, Germany. Became King of Germany at age 3, Holy Roman Emperor at 16, Ottonian dynasty. Otto III became King of Germany at 3 years old when his father Otto II died unexpectedly during a military campaign in southern Italy, beginning one of the most ambitious reigns in medieval European history. His minority was governed by his mother Theophanu, a Byzantine princess, and his grandmother Adelaide of Italy, both remarkable women who maintained imperial authority during his childhood. The young king's upbringing combined German military traditions with Byzantine cultural sophistication and classical Roman imperial ideology, creating a unique educational foundation for his later reign. His coronation as Holy Roman Emperor at age 16 marked the beginning of his personal rule and his ambitious attempt to restore the Roman Empire in both name and reality. Otto's youth allowed him to embrace radical ideas about imperial authority that older, more experienced rulers might have rejected as impractical or dangerous. His court became a centre of intellectual ferment, attracting scholars like Gerber of Aurillac, later Pope Sylvester II, who shared his vision of Renovatio Imperii, the renewal of the Roman Empire. The young emperor's policies reflected his cosmopolitan upbringing and classical education, as he sought to integrate German, Byzantine and Roman traditions into a new imperial synthesis. His decision to establish his court in Rome rather than traditional German centres showed his commitment to reviving ancient imperial traditions, though it alienated many German nobles. Otto's reign saw remarkable cultural achievements, including the spread of classical learning and the development of new artistic styles that combined various European traditions. His diplomatic initiatives reached from Poland to Hungary to the Byzantine Empire, as the young emperor sought to create a new European order centered on renewed Roman authority. The 3-year-old who inherited a German kingdom grew into a visionary emperor whose ambitious dreams ultimately exceeded his practical abilities, but inspired future generations of rulers. His early death at age 21 cut short one of the most intellectually ambitious reigns in medieval history, leaving historians to wonder what he might have achieved with